Hi everyone, today we are going to learn about ions and ionic bonding, which is one of the most important concepts in chemistry. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand what ions are, how they form, and how they combine to make ionic compounds like table salt. Let's dive in! Before we can understand ions, we must know what atoms are. So, atoms are made up of three subatomic particles. These particles are neutrons, protons, and electrons. Neutrons and protons are located in the nucleus, which is the middle part of the atom. Neutrons are neutrally charged. Protons are positively charged. Electrons are located around the nucleus on energy shells around the atom. These are electrons. These are protons. Atoms are neutral when they have the same amount of protons and electrons. And these are neutrons. Atoms always want to have a full outer shell of electrons, usually 8. This is called the octet rule. When an atom loses electrons, it becomes positively charged, which is called a cation. When an atom gains electrons, it becomes negatively charged, which is called an anion. Ions are just atoms that have an electric charge because they've lost or gained electrons. Now we have examples of a cation and an anion. So the first example is sodium. Sodium loses its last shell because it wants to follow the octet rule where it has 8 in its valence electron. Because it loses 1 electron, it has a +1 charge due to the 1 electron it's lost. This leads to it being a cation. For an anion, we have chlorine. Chlorine starts with 17 electrons, but it wants to get to 18 because it wants that full shell of 8. Because of this, it has to gain 1 electron, which leads to a -1 charge, leading for it to be an anion. Now, let's talk about ionic bonding. Ionic bonding happens between a metal and a nonmetal. The metal loses its electrons to become a positive ion, and the nonmetal gains those electrons to become a negative ion. These opposites attract, just like magnets. An example of this is sodium, which we had before, sodium, Na, which has 1 valence electron. I'm using Lewis dot diagrams to be clear. And then we have chlorine, which has 7. Sodium wants to lose its electron, where chlorine wants to gain its electron. This works well because sodium's electron goes here, and then this turns into sodium, a sodium ion, which is +1. And then we also have chlorine, which has its full valence electron of 8. This is a -1 because of the electron it's gaining. This ionic bond forms NaCl, or sodium chloride. It is also known as table salt. Ionic bonds are strong because they're formed by the powerful attraction of oppositely charged ions, cations, and anions. Now we're going to look at some examples together. So we can start off with magnesium and fluorine. So magnesium has 2 valence electrons, where fluorine has 7. Because we can't get the smooth switch like we did with sodium and chlorine, we'll need 2 fluorine atoms. These 2 fluorine atoms will be able to take both of magnesium's valence electrons, which will be able to satisfy both the fluorines and the magnesium. Because of this, we will have Mg plus 2. We'll have fluorine with its full valence set, which will be -1, but we'll have 2 of them because there's 2 fluorines here. This creates magnesium fluoride, which is MgF2, because there's 2 fluorines and 1 magnesium. Lastly, we're going to look at a harder example, which is aluminum and sulfur. So we start off with our aluminum, which has 3 valence electrons. Our sulfur, on the other hand, has 6. So it's kind of hard to work with these two. So we can give 2 here, but then we still have 1 less for aluminum. So we need to bring in another sulfur. This gives another one to sulfur. And then aluminum is satisfied, but we need more because sulfur doesn't have its 8 valence electron. So we need to bring in another aluminum. Aluminum gives this to sulfur. However, we're still left with 2 more. So this means we still need to bring 1 more sulfur in. And then we can bring these 2. And then with this, all of the atoms in this bonding are satisfied. This creates aluminum sulfide. The aluminum loses 3 electrons, so it has +3 charge. And there's 2 of them, so we write a subscript of 2 at the bottom. And then for our sulfur, since it's the anion, we have to write the 8 electrons. And then since it gains 2, we have a -2 charge. Since there's 3 sulfurs, we put a subscript of 3 at the bottom. This creates aluminum sulfide, which the formula we can write as Al2S3. So in conclusion, ions form when atoms lose or gain electrons. This gives them a net charge. When you lose electrons, this means it's a cation. When you gain electrons, this is an anion. Ionic bonding happens between metals and non-metals. Opposite charges attract. This creates strong ionic compounds. Thank you guys for listening. And remember, next time you sprinkle salt on your fries, that's an ionic bonding in action. And good luck with your chemistry learning.